Hey guys, tonight we slip through a narrow stone corridor that smells faintly of damp moss and melted wax, until we arrive at a chamber where every corner is draped with thick velvet. Tapestries hang heavy on the walls, embroidered with saints, hunts, and heraldic beasts, though at this hour they feel less like decoration and more like guardians, staring out with eyes stitched in gold thread. The room is bathed in the glow of beeswax candles, their flames bending and fluttering, casting tall shadows that rise and collapse like ghostly dancers across the fabric. You catch yourself wondering whether the flicker is the wind seeping through arrow slits, or whether it's something far less explainable and just, and an immune system made of steel. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I love knowing where in the world my sleepy historians are tuning in from, so leave your location and your local time down in the comments. I'll be checking. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Asterisk, asterisk, you lower yourself into the chamber. Every candle has been carefully positioned, not only for light, but for ritual meaning. Some nobles insisted flames be grouped in threes to honor the Trinity, while others favored 7, believing the number kept demons at bay. Historians still argue whether these arrangements were theological conviction or simply household superstition dressed up as piety. The effect, though, is undeniable. The glow makes the chamber shimmer, blurring the line between sacred and eerie. The bed commands attention. Its canopy rises like a small fortress, with curtains that can be drawn tight. Those curtains weren't just for warmth, they were believed to block wandering spirits. And there, tucked discreetly beneath one silken pillow, lies a glint of cold steel, a dagger, slim and polished. No intruder would ever see it unless invited. Placing a blade under the bed or pillow was a peculiar ritual, a charm as much as a defense. Nobles believed iron or steel had the power to repel witches and restless souls. Imagine trying to drift into peaceful sleep while your head rests inches above sharpened metal. Who needs chamomile tea when you have the medieval version of a security system? You move closer, noticing that the dagger isn't alone. Small tokens scatter across the bedside: a carved wooden crucifix, a pouch of dried lavender, a rosary half hidden in folds of linen. The blend of sacred and domestic is striking. This room doubles as a chapel of sorts, a place where night never arrives without prayer or ritual. The air itself is heavy with scent, wax, dried herbs, and a faint musk of wool and old stone. And then there's the silence. Not the comforting hush of a modern bedroom, but a silence broken only by the pop of candlewick and the distant echo of iron-shod boots on flagstones. Somewhere below, a servant coughs. You wonder if they, too, believe in the dagger ritual, or whether they just see it as another eccentricity of their lords. Some scholars claim this practice was widespread among knights returning from crusade, carrying with them tales of enchanted blades and demonic assaults in desert nights. Others argue it was little more than practical paranoia for all. Castles were drafty, doors unreliable, and enemies not always on the outside. A chill sneaks through the tapestry, brushing your neck. You tighten the cloak around your shoulders. Shadows shift across the embroidered lions and saints, giving the illusion they are alive, stalking or blessing you, depending on how the light strikes. In that moment, you realize the chamber is less a place of rest and more a stage set for survival. To a medieval noble, sleep was never innocent. It was a time of exposure, of vulnerability, and thus it demanded theater, protection, and yes, a sharp blade tucked close enough to prick your dreams. You notice the floorboards near the bed, worn smoother than the rest. Countless nights of pacing, or servants gliding quietly to ensure every ritual object was in place. A footstool bears scratches as though something was dragged or clawed against it. You consider the possibility of pets, dogs, cats, or something stranger sharing the space. Later, you'll learn more of these peculiar additions. For now, though, the room holds you in its breath. You sit, and the bed sighs under the weight, the mattress stuffed with straw and wool. The curtains close with a whisper of fabric, cocooning you in the wavering glow. If you listen hard, you almost hear whispers woven into the tapestries themselves. Tales of battles, hunts, and prayers stitched long ago by hands now gone. And the dagger, yes, you can feel its presence, even without touching it. Cold, patient, like a sentinel beneath the pillow, it is easy, in this atmosphere, to believe in spirits, omens, and the need for hidden weapons. Easy to believe that every noble family rehearsed this ritual night after night, not merely out of custom, but out of fear that the darkness might swallow them whole. You wonder what strange comfort it must bring to drift into uneasy slumber with steel guarding your dreams. The flame bends once more, and for a moment it looks exactly like the gleam of the blade itself. Asterisk, asterisk. The corridor outside remains restless, even as the noble chamber itself quiets into flickering shadows. If you lean against the door, you can make out the rhythm of slippered feet padding across flagstones, the low murmur of voices, the faint clatter of brass basins being moved. The nobles upstairs may imagine they are alone in their world of velvet curtains and ritual objects, but the truth is that an invisible army works tirelessly to keep those illusions alive. Servants do not sleep when their masters do. In fact, their night is only beginning. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't last more than 2 days as a medieval servant, unless you enjoy being jolted awake at midnight to refill someone else's brazier. The first to appear is a boy, no more than 12. His tunic hangs loose, his eyes are half-lidded with exhaustion, but his steps are sure. He carries a bundle of herbs, tied with rough twine, lavender stalks, sprigs of sage, and a scattering of rosemary. He moves to the far side of the bed, crouches low, and pushes the bundle beneath the mattress. His movements are quick, practiced, almost furtive, though the noble occupant isn't supposed to notice. You realize this is part of the ritual, herbs hidden in the very structure of the bed, to purify the space and repel nightmares. Lavender has always been associated with calming nerves. Even now, people put lavender sachets in drawers. But in the Middle Ages, nobles believed its scent could confuse demons or wandering spirits. Sage was thought to cleanse evil from the air, while rosemary carried protective power against sickness. Was this truly medicine, or was it an elaborate placebo wrapped in fragrant leaves? Historians still argue whether these habits came from folk medicine bubbling up from peasant cottages, or whether they filtered down from monastic recipes and prayers. But either way, the bundle stays in place. Then a maid enters, balancing a tray draped with cloth. On it lies folded linen, a cloak, and a small pouch that rattles when she sets it down. She unknots the string, tips the contents into her palm, and you see what at first look like barley grains. Yet, in the warm candlelight, they glisten differently, tiny, dark poppy seeds. A curious thing to keep beside a noble's bed. In modern times, poppy seeds cling to your teeth on bagels. Back then, they carried an aura of mystery and potency. It was believed that eating a few seeds before bed invited gentle sleep. Some whispered that if you chewed them with a silent prayer, the dreams would be more than dreams. They would be visions, omens, sent from heaven or hell. There are even chronicles suggesting certain lords consumed them before deciding political questions, hoping to dream of a clear answer. Whether true or not, the maid places them carefully beside a goblet of spiced wine. They wait like tiny black jewels, ready for the lord or lady to tip onto the tongue. Imagine swapping your chamomile tea ritual for a crunchy mouthful of medieval dream pellets. I'll pass, thank you. At the same time, another servant tends the brazier. She crouches low, her face glowing orange in the coal light, and blows gently until the embers crackle. She sprinkles dried mint onto the coals. The sharp smell floods the chamber, clearing your sinuses so suddenly you nearly sneeze. For nobles, this was more than fresh air. The smoke was thought to carry whispered prayers upward, spiraling toward heaven. To a modern nose, it's halfway between aromatherapy and cough syrup. But what strikes you most is not the objects there. Curious enough, but the silence of the people moving them. Servants have mastered the art of invisibility. They step only where the boards are quietest. They time their breaths with the crackle of the brazier, so as not to be heard. They leave without a word. To stumble, to make a loud noise, was to risk punishment, and punishment could be brutal. No one wanted to be the servant who woke the Lord with a clumsy footstep. Yet, for all the fear, there's also a strange devotion. Some of these young attendants mutter phrases under their breath as they lay down the objects. You catch a whisper in Latin, half prayer, half rhyment, to protect them from taking on the sins of what they carry. After all, if the poppy seeds carried visions, what if those visions clung to the hands that placed them? Better to whisper a charm, just in case. Historians note scattered accounts of such muttered words, though whether they were superstition or simply routine, we may never know. And here's an odd truth. Many servants sought out these nightly duties. As exhausting as they were, working inside the noble bedchamber meant warmth, food scraps, and a chance to linger near the candlelight when the rest of the castle froze. Better to breathe mint smoke than to shiver in a stable. A noble's bedtime ritual, strange as it sounds, was also a servant's survival strategy. You watch as the trays are carried out, the bundles tucked away, the brazier glowing steady. The noble family, lying between their velvet curtains, will never truly notice these preparations. They will believe the night is orderly and safe. In truth, it is the constant vigilance of others that builds that illusion. The candle nearest the bed sputters, throwing one last gleam across the waiting pouch of poppy seeds. Soon they will be consumed, and with them the hope that the night passes peacefully. Were the seeds medicinal, magical, or merely ritual? Scholars continue to debate, but tonight, with the air heavy with herbs, smoke, and whispered words. You feel that something unseen lingers in the room, watching, listening, and deciding whether sleep will be a blessing or a curse. You take a slow breath and realize every noble dream rests on the backs of those who never dream at all. The chamber now breathes with quiet anticipation, as though the air itself knows the rituals have not yet finished. You stand near the bed and hear the rustle of fabric. Heavy garments are being loosened, set aside one by one. Nobles did not tumble into bed in tunics and trousers like common folk. Their nightly disrobing was almost ceremonial, a performance for themselves, for attendants, and perhaps even for unseen spirits. First comes the cloak, lined with fur for the cold draft seeping in through arrow slits. Then a doublet, thick with embroidery, stiff from days of wear. A belt jingles as it's unclasped, carrying the faint metallic echo of keys, charms, and sometimes tiny reliquaries. Each item lands in the arms of a waiting servant, who folds it with careful precision. You feel the weight of each layer falling away, and for a brief moment you catch the noble's relief. Imagine peeling off a medieval outfit after a banquet. You probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes without begging for modern pajamas. But pajamas were not part of this world. Instead, nobles changed into nightclothes, designed less for rest than for ritual. A long gown of wool, dyed in muted tones, is slipped over the head. For wealthier families, the fabric might be silk-lined with fur, shimmering even in candlelight. These garments were not about comfort, they were symbols. Some chroniclers claimed certain colors were avoided. Black drew spirits, red tempted lust. White, however, symbolized purity, and many noble women were wrapped in linen that made them look like holy relics prepared for vigil. Historians still argue whether these choices came from genuine belief or from a noble's eagerness to show piety in front of servants. And here's the strange twist. Many believed that clothing did more than cover the body. A few manuscripts hint at the superstition that if you slept unclothed, your soul might wander too far in the night, leaving you vulnerable to possession. So, while peasants often collapsed naked beneath rough blankets, nobles layered themselves in fabric, convinced it was both shield and anchor. Suddenly, the heavy nightgown makes sense, not just fashion, but metaphysics. You notice an accessory too, a cap. Yes, the classic nightcap isn't just a cartoon cliché. It kept heads warm in freezing rooms. But some nobles believed it protected the mind from wicked thoughts slipping in through the crown of the skull. Imagine wearing a woolen cone hat to bed and explaining to your spouse it's for demon protection. Romantic, isn't it? There's also the matter of jewelry. Rings and chains were removed, but not always. Certain amulets stayed on through the night. A carved gemstone believed to ward off epilepsy. A cross that was thought to keep incubus demons at bay. Even a dried frog bone, tucked in a pouch and hung around the neck. These were not heirlooms for display, they were talismans for survival. Servants assist in silence, though occasionally a whisper breaks through. Too tight, one asks, while fastening a belt. The noble shakes their head. These whispers reveal intimacy. For all their distance, nobles were still human, and nightly dressing and undressing created small moments of vulnerability. But vulnerability was precisely what the rituals sought to erase. By the time the noble was wrapped in layers of silk, wool, and linen, they were armored against the night as thoroughly as they had been armored for battle during the day. A curious anecdote drifts through your mind. In one French household, records note that a nobleman had a special nightrobe embroidered with psalms. He believed the stitched words would surround him in divine scripture as he slept. Was it faith, fashion, or both? Historians are still scratching their heads. But tonight, you picture those golden letters glimmering in candlelight, a wearable prayer shimmering across a drowsy chest. And as the garments settle, as the servants smooth out the last creases, the noble finally exhales. The day's armor lies in a heap of velvet and iron nearby. But this new armor-softer stranger, stitched with superstition wraps around body and soul alike. You can almost feel the weight of it pressing your shoulders, as if you, too, were about to climb into that curtained fortress of a bed. The chamber stills. The dagger under the pillow glints faintly, and now the noble lies swaddled in fabric, as though preparing for a journey, not of miles across land, but of dreams across uncertain terrain. In this ritual, sleep is no simple act. It is a voyage, and one must dress appropriately or risk being stranded on the far side of night. Asterisk, asterisk. The air shifts again as the servants return, carrying polished silver basins that glint and ripple with candlelight. The sound of their footsteps is muffled by rushes strewn across the floor, but the faint slosh of water betrays their presence. You lean closer, expecting plain water, but your nose catches something sweeter. Steam rises from the basin, carrying the perfume of roses, chamomile, and sometimes marjoram or hyssop. This is not a casual rinse before bed. It is a sacred cleansing, a nightly ritual of both body and spirit. Beaten silver, their rims engraved with prayers or family crests, reflect the glow of the flames in a halo of shifting light. To dip your hands into one of these is not only to wash away the grit of the day, but also to symbolically wash away sin, envy, and wandering spirits. In a society where full baths were rare luxuries, this act was magnified tenfold. Imagine treating your nightly face wash as both a health regimen and a defense against demons. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive long in the Middle Ages without sneaking a full shower. At some point, a young attendant kneels at the noble's feet, holding the basin steady while another pours warm water from a copper pitcher. Petals swirl across the surface like drifting stars. The noble dips fingers, then palms, letting the warmth linger. Rosewater wasn't chosen at random. Apothecaries praised its ability to soften skin and soothe the heart. Monks swore it calmed nerves and invited holy dreams. And, whispered in darker corners, some claimed it was an aphrodisiac, preparing body and mind not just for sleep, but for intimacy. Historians still argue whether this nightly bathing was genuinely medical, purely spiritual, or a discreet form of seduction cloaked in sanctity. After the washing comes the combing. A silver comb, polished so clean you could see candlelight dancing in its teeth, is drawn slowly through the noble's hair. Servants work with careful rhythm, stroke by stroke, while strands tumble like silk into orderly lines. For us, this looks like grooming. For them, it was protection. Tangled hair risked trapping evil influences. Smooth hair allowed peace to flow more freely. Some believed demons could clutch at a knot in the hair to drag your soul out in sleep. And so the combing was done religiously, sometimes exactly 100 strokes, as if each tug removed a hidden danger. You can picture a noblewoman, half asleep, murmuring 97, before dozing off. Then, the moment of the stranger ritual. The servant opens a pouch and presents the tiny black poppy seeds you glimpsed earlier. They glisten like fragments of night sky spilled into a palm. The noble tips a small pinch onto the tongue, crunching softly. The taste is earthy, nutty, faintly bitter. Yet the meaning was sweeter. Poppy seeds were believed to lull the body toward restful slumber, to thicken the veil between the waking world and dreams. Some noble families swore the seeds gave prophetic visions, glimpses of battles to come, omens of birth or death, even answers to disputes too dangerous to discuss aloud. Were these seeds medicine, magic, or merely midnight placebo? Historians still debate, but the fact remains. Many noble households recorded their use, tucked discreetly into the margins of prayer books. The brazier crackles again in the corner. A servant sprinkles a pinch of frankincense or crushed myrrh onto the embers. Sparks leap upward, and fragrant smoke coils toward the rafters. To medieval minds, smoke was not decoration. It was prayer in visible form, curling upward like an invisible ladder to heaven. Some even believed the right scent repelled demons as effectively as holy water. Tonight, the room smells less like a damp stone castle and more like a chapel garden. Roses, mint, resin, and smoke layered into one intoxicating cloud. But there are stranger details. One chronicler in Burgundy described how nobles whispered short psalms over the basin, believing that holy words stirred into rosewater magnified its power. Another account mentions servants instructed to catch the very first drops of water poured from the pitcher, because those drops were considered most potent at banishing evil dreams. These may sound fringe, but for nobles who lived in a world of uncertainty, every detail mattered. You can almost feel the noble's body shifting into a new state, skin damp and perfumed, hair gleaming, tongue tingling with seeds, chest warmed by smoke. The heavy garments from earlier now cling with faint fragrance, as though sanctified. The entire body is transformed, prepared not for battle or banquet, but for the invisible struggle of sleep. And here's the eerie part. Some households recorded that this was the moment to test loyalty. Servants who helped with the cleansing sometimes slipped charms into the water or whispered personal prayers over their masters. Was it a blessing or a curse? No noble could ever be sure. A basin of rosewater might be the purest of gifts or the slyest of weapons. The cleansing concludes with a soft bow. Servants gather basins and combs, lifting them as silently as they came. The chamber exhales. The noble, hair smoothed and skin scented, leans back into the pillows. Yet the rituals hang heavy in the air. The dagger remains hidden beneath the pillow. The herbs still rest under the mattress. And now, with rose water drying on the skin and poppy seeds dissolving in the stomach, the noble is halfway between worlds. Half in this chamber of stone and firelight, half already drifting toward the land of dreams. You realize that to a medieval mind, this was no small thing. To fall asleep unwashed, uncombed, unprotected by herb and smoke was unthinkable. Night was not leisure was a perilous crossing, and every ritual, however strange, was a lifeline stretched across the darkness. The chamber feels quieter now, but not empty. The poppy seeds linger on the noble's breath, the rosewater dries against their skin, and the smoke from frankincense curls lazily toward the rafters. You'd think the rituals would end here, but no, this is when the stranger, darker habits surface. Not all noble families trusted water, herbs, and seeds to keep them safe. Some believed that to truly shield the household from curses, more drastic offerings were needed. And so, a fire is fed something other than wood. A servant kneels by the brazier with a small cloth pouch. You hear a faint rattle inside. Nothing metallic, nothing heavy, just fragile scraps. The pouch is opened, and out tumble small clippings, nails trimmed earlier in the day, strands of hair collected from a comb, sometimes even a shard of bone carved from an old feast. Each piece is cast onto the glowing embers. The smell that follows is sharp, acrid, and unsettling. Unlike the sweet frankincense from before. To the medieval mind, these cast-offs of the body were dangerous if left lying around. Witches, it was said, could use your hair or nails to bind your soul. So nobles turned the threat into a ritual. Better to burn them, letting smoke purify what might otherwise betray you. Historians still argue whether this was a common practice or just a handful of eccentric households. Either way, it left behind a unique odor, one that mixed oddly with roses and mint, leaving the air both holy and haunting. You probably wouldn't survive long in that smell before opening a window. If castles had windows you could actually open. One chronicle from Saxony describes a lord who insisted every servant deposit their day's clippings in a chest, which was burned in the brazier each night. Another French account mentions that ashes of nails, when sprinkled on thresholds, protected against thieves. A bizarre idea, but in a world where locks were flimsy and rumors of sorcery thrived, superstition was its own form of security system. And here's the fringe twist. Some nobles didn't stop at burning. They mixed the ashes with wine or bread, consumed secretly as a potion believed to return strength to the body. Did it work? Historians still shake their heads. But imagine raising a goblet at supper and realizing part of what you're drinking is your own fingernails from last week. Suddenly, that spiced almond dessert doesn't seem so appetizing. The fire consumes each clipping with a hiss, sparks rising like tiny spirits. The noble watches without flinching. To them, this is routine. The brazier is no longer just warmth, it's a crucible where vulnerability is destroyed before it can be used against them. The logic is strange but oddly consistent. If sleep is a journey, you must lighten your baggage. Hair, nails, fragments all cast into flame so nothing can follow you into dreams. Servants bow their heads as the smoke thickens. You notice one of them whispering a short charm in the vernacular. Not Latin this time. It's quick, almost furtive, like something learned at a grandmother's knee. Was it tolerated? Perhaps. Nobles may not have cared, so long as the ritual seemed to work. Or perhaps they, too, felt reassured by peasant magic supplementing scripture. The blend of high religion and kitchen witchcraft was common in these households. Saints on the walls, but herbs in the mattress. Psalms at dinner, but charms muttered over fire. And yet, there's tension here. One bishop's letter condemns these practices as pagan fire, writes, Another monastery record scolds noble women for burning hair and calling it prayer. Still, the habits endured. Scholars suggest it was partly because hair and nails were deeply personal. To burn them was to take control of what you shed, rather than letting the world or your enemies make use of it. The fire fades into low red glow. The room smells faintly scorched, though softened now by a servant sprinkling more herbs to mask the odor. The noble's eyes droop, but you can sense a new alertness beneath the drowsiness. The ritual of burning has left them lighter, safer, convinced the night will bring no curse, and you're left with the uneasy awareness that the line between medicine, magic, and paranoia was razor thin in these chambers. Two medieval nobles. The ashes in the brazier were more than smoke. They were proof that they had outwitted both sorcery and sickness. Whether true or not, the belief itself was powerful enough to lull them toward sleep. The brazier's glow fades to embers, yet the chamber does not fall into silence. Instead, the scent of roasting meat and sweet spices wafts in from the hall. You realize that bedtime in a noble household was rarely a fast from food. On the contrary, many families indulged in what might be called a secret supper, a final indulgence before surrendering to sleep. A tray is carried in covered with a heavy cloth to keep its contents warm. When the fabric is lifted, you see goblets of spiced wine, small dishes of candied almonds, and sometimes a sliver of cold roast meat. For a class obsessed with appearances, these midnight snacks were both practical and indulgent. The fire in the stomach was believed to warm the body against the chill. Sweet flavors, especially honey or sugar, were considered a blessing, inviting good dreams. Of course, historians still debate whether these feasts were encouraged by physicians or frowned upon as gluttony. But for nobles, the night was long, and hunger could feel like vulnerability. What makes this ritual stranger, though, is the presence of animals. At the foot of the bed, you notice a cage, its bars thin and polished. Inside sits a small creature, sometimes a rabbit, sometimes a bird, sometimes even a kitten. To modern eyes, it looks like a pet, but to medieval nobles, this animal played a role in warding off sickness or nightmares. There was a belief, whispered more than written, that certain animals could draw out illness or misfortune. If a noble woke refreshed, it was said the creature had absorbed their suffering during the night. And if the animal died suddenly, proof in their eyes that the ritual had worked. You probably wouldn't survive, explaining this to your vet. Yes, doctor. The rabbit sleeps in my room to collect my bad dreams. But to these families, it was not a joke. It was survival, cloaked in superstition. Accounts vary. In Italy, nobles kept canaries in ornate cages, convinced their cheerful chirping drove away spirits. In Northern Europe, cats were preferred, partly because they already carried associations with mystery. In France, a few households placed a white hare near the bed, believing its red eyes could spot witches. Scholars still argue whether these practices were eccentric one-offs or widespread traditions. The truth is elusive, tucked between folklore and fact. The midnight meal continues while the animal waits in its cage or basket. The noble dips candied almonds into spiced wine, the sugar crystals glittering like jewels. Servants pour quietly, careful not to disturb. In the hush, you realize that this too is ritual theater. Eating before bed was not only nourishment, it was a symbolic affirmation of life before surrendering to the vulnerability of sleep. If the day was filled with political threats, assassins, or the specter of plague, a sweet bite at midnight was a statement. I am still alive, and I will rise again at dawn. And yet danger lingered even here. Chronicles note cases where nobles feared poison in these very meals. Tasting rituals where common servants or tasters would sample first, watching carefully for signs of illness. Imagine your last snack of the day, depending on whether your servant keeled over first. You probably wouldn't survive dessert with that kind of stress. But notice the pattern. Each act, whether eating, drinking, or keeping animals close, is designed to tip the scales of fate in the noble's favor. Food sweetens the soul. Wine warms the body. Animals absorb what humans cannot. And as the embers glow in the brazier, the chamber feels like a curious balance of banquet hall, chapel, and apothecary. The noble finishes, dabbing lips with a cloth embroidered with initials. The tray is removed, the cage nudged slightly closer to the bed. A servant sprinkles a final pinch of herbs into the brazier, the scent mingling with sugar and smoke. You sense that the rituals are building towards something, the bed itself, waiting like a stage, curtains drawn, canopy towering above. For now, though, the chamber rests in this strange equilibrium. Sweetness on the tongue, warmth in the belly, and a silent companion curled in its cage at the foot of the bed. Whether or not the rituals truly worked, they stitched together the fragile sense that night could be tamed. And in a world where death lurked around every corner, belief itself was a feast worth savoring. The chamber has now become more than a room. It is a stage. And at the center of this stage stands the Bedan object, so massive, so ornate, that it seems to dominate the very rhythm of the household. If you expected a simple cot of wood and straw, you'd be mistaken. Noble beds in the late Middle Ages were towering constructions, with canopies carved like cathedral ceilings and curtains thick enough to swallow every flicker of candlelight. The act of approaching the bed was itself ceremonial. Servants did not simply point and say, "Sleep here." Instead, they prepared it like an altar. Furs were shaken, sheets smoothed, and pillows beaten until they released faint puffs of feathers into the air. Each movement felt rehearsed, a choreography repeated night after night. And yet, to the noble eye, this was not just housekeeping. It was the crafting of a fortress. The curtains, once drawn, created a space within a space, a chamber inside the chamber. And here enters another ritual few people outside those circles ever witnessed: the placing of an animal directly onto the bed itself. While peasants often had dogs or cats snuggling by necessity, nobles did this for superstition. A small cat, often black, would be settled near the noble's feet. The belief was that cats could sense spirits before they appeared, and if danger loomed, the cat would grow restless, serving as a furry alarm bell. In other households, a lapdog was preferred, its steady heartbeat thought to calm anxious minds. One noblewoman in Burgundy was said to keep a dove in a small basket set right on the coverleton, oddly fragile guardian. But one, she swore, never failed to keep her dreams sweet. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread rituals or personal eccentricities, but the accounts we do have are vivid. A courtier's letter from the 14th century mentions nobles who swore their cats drank the poison of dreams so that masters might rest untroubled. Others scoffed at the notion, calling it a pagan relic. Still, the fact that these stories survive suggests the animals were more than pets. They were participants in the nighttime liturgy of the noble household. As you step closer, you notice how the bed itself reinforces the drama. Its curtains are not just cloth, but embroidered panels depicting saints, virtues, or even astrological symbols. Imagine lying down beneath a canopy covered in stitched images of the zodiac, as though every star in the heavens leaned closer to watch your sleep. Some beds even had scripture stitched into the hems of the curtains, so that when you drew them closed, you literally wrapped yourself in holy words. The noble climbs into this fortress slowly, with the same reverence as entering a chapel. Shoes are removed. Servants pull the curtains halfway shut. The animal cat, dog, or dove settles with a small sigh or rustle. And then comes the detail that strikes you. Attendants remain nearby, not outside the chamber, but within sight of the bed. For many families, at least one servant slept lightly on a pallet near the curtains, in case the nobles stirred or cried out. Privacy was not part of medieval life. Even dreams had witnesses. To modern minds, the idea of being observed as you sleep might feel unsettling. To them, it was assurance. If nightmares struck, someone could fetch water or cross themselves over your trembling body. If assassins dared, someone would be there to shout the alarm. And if you were a lord or lady consumed by fears of poison, sorcery, or rebellion, perhaps the most comforting thing of all was the sound of another human breathing. Close by. You notice again the blend of the sacred and the strange. A dagger under the pillow, herbs under the mattress, a cat curled at the foot, curtains embroidered with saints. Each piece by itself might seem eccentric, but together they weave a net meant to catch every threat. Sleep is no longer passive. It is performance, defense, and prayer wrapped into one. The noble lies back, pulling the final coverlet to the chin. The servants adjust the last folds of fabric, ensuring no draft can pierce the cocoon. The bed sighs as wood settles, and ropes creak faintly under the straw-stuffed mattress. The curtains are drawn fully now, the world outside vanishing, leaving only a muffled glow and the faint sound of a cat purring. And in that moment, you realize the truth. The bed was not merely a place of rest. It was a stage where vulnerability met ritual. Every night was opening night, and the performance was survival. The curtains of the bed are now drawn tight, shutting out most of the candlelight. From outside, you hear only the faint crackle of the brazier and the occasional creak of wood as the castle settles for the night. Yet, inside the canopy, voices stir. This is not silence, it is the theater of whispers. Noble families often used the privacy of night to speak words too risky for daylight. Within the cocoon of fabric, guarded by servants outside and muffled by embroidered drapes, confidences spilled. Marriages were negotiated. Here alliances whispered between husband and wife, or even between a noble and their trusted consort. Some of Europe's most important dynastic plans may have been murmured under velvet curtains, their first breath of life taking place while the household slept unaware. You can almost picture the scene, two figures lying side by side, voices low, as if even the stone walls might betray them. But there was danger in these whispers too. Not every conversation was gentle. Secrets of betrayal, of plots, of poisonings could slip into the night air here. Chronicles hint at nobles confessing suspicions in bed, only for servants on nearby pallets to overhear and spread the words by morning. Privacy was an illusion, even with heavy curtains drawn. Historians still argue whether nobles truly believed these conversations stayed contained, or whether they knew their whispers would ripple through the castle, becoming a subtle form of theater in itself. And woven into these talks was yet another ritual, something rarer, half documented, half feared. It was said that some nobles, when anxious about the future, whispered their prayers, not to God alone, but to the moon. Imagine the scene. The curtains parted slightly, a shaft of cold silver light slipping in, and a noble raising their eyes to the window, murmuring words that sounded like supplication. The moon was thought to rule tides, crops, even the fate of childbirth. If you wanted heirs, prosperity, or safety on campaign, you might trust the moon to hear you when heaven seemed silent. One chronicler in England wrote of a countess who spoke nightly to the moon as to a sister, asking fortune for her children. Another, more skeptical monk dismissed such practices as witchcraft, clothed in noble silk. Scholars today still debate whether these moon prayers were fringe superstition or part of a broader astrological faith that ran quietly beneath medieval Christianity. Either way, the image is haunting an aristocrat in a perfumed chamber, eyes fixed on the glowing disk beyond arrow slits, whispering desires too dangerous to voice at court. The voices within the canopy mingle, fragments of alliances, confessions, prayers, and dreams. A servant outside stirs, perhaps catching a phrase, perhaps pretending not to hear. This tension between secrecy and exposure made the noble bedchamber both safe haven and potential trap. One slip of the tongue, one overheard word, could shift the balance of power in a family or even an entire region. And yet, the rituals lent structure to this vulnerability. A cat purred at the noble's feet, believed to drink away evil dreams. Herbs beneath the mattress still worked their silent charm. A dagger glinted under the pillow. And above all, the moon itself, whether revered or ignored, watched through the high, narrow window, its light falling like a second set of curtains over the room. The whispers soften, then fade. Perhaps agreements have been reached, or perhaps exhaustion pulls the voices into drowsy silence. You realize that the night for a medieval noble was never just sleep, it was negotiation, performance, and ritual all at once. Even in bed, wrapped in silk and shadow, they were never entirely at rest. Asterisk, asterisk, the bedchamber lies hushed now, curtains heavy, the brazier dimming to a faint glow. For the first time tonight, true silence settles over the room. But it is not a silence of peace, it is a silence filled with tension, as though waiting for something unseen. You feel the weight of the day's rituals pressing down, the dagger beneath the pillow, the herbs under the mattress, the poppy seeds on the tongue, the faint smell of burnt hair and nails still clinging to the air. All of it has built toward this moment's sleep itself, the most fragile and dangerous ritual of all. You lie beside the noble in imagination, listening to the rhythm of their breathing. At first, it steadies, drifting toward rest, but sleep is not a guarantee. In the medieval mind, Dreams were not random sparks of memory. They were messages, warnings, sometimes even intrusions by demons. And so every sound in the chamber feels magnified. The flutter of the caged bird at the foot of the bed, the restless shift of the cat, the soft sigh of a servant half dozing on a pallet nearby. Each detail feels like an omen. The noble stirs. Perhaps it is the poppy seeds working their subtle magic. Their eyelids twitch, lips move faintly as though speaking. And then comes the gasp, the sharp intake of breath that marks the plunge into dream. Was it a good vision or a troubling one? Hard to say. But in these households, dreams mattered. Some were recounted in the morning to confessors or astrologers who parsed every symbol like holy scripture. Was a river in a dream a sign of prosperity or of flooding to come? Historians still argue whether nobles truly believed these interpretations or used them as convenient excuses for decisions already made. And then there was fear, the fear of nightmares. The incubus, a demon said to sit upon the chest of sleepers, was a common terror. To ward it off, nobles whispered prayers, clutched crucifixes, or even muttered charms in the moments before drifting off. Yet sometimes the fear was too great, and even the rituals failed. Chroniclers tell of nobles waking in terror, crying out, servants rushing forward with water, candles relit, curtains thrown open. Nightmares weren't dismissed as just dreams. They were warnings, battles in miniature, sometimes blamed on curses or witchcraft. One ritual tied to these fears is especially strange. Some nobles, it is said, would whisper their desires directly to the moon before sleeping, hoping the celestial body would intercede in dreams. Tonight, as clouds drift across the high arrow slit, a pale shaft of moonlight falls across the curtain. You imagine the noble parting, the drapes, lifting their gaze, and murmuring words too soft for servants to hear. Was it a prayer for children, for victory, for mercy? The moon, silent and cold, offers no answer. Yet the act itself is reassurance that even in sleep, the noble has appealed to powers greater than themselves. The dream resumes. You picture shifting landscapes, a forest filled with voices, a battlefield where faces blur, a banquet where every goblet tastes of ash. These were not idle phantasms. They were treated as messages that could shape tomorrow's choices. If a noble dreamed of victory, they might ride boldly into war. If they dreamed of betrayal, they might imprison a friend by morning. The line between dream and waking reality was frighteningly thin. You lie still, feeling the room pulse with this tension. The cat at the foot of the bed stretches, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The caged bird rustles once, as though disturbed by something unseen. A servant shifts in their sleep, muttering a quick prayer. The noble breathes uneasily, lost in visions only they can see. To us, it seems like a restless night. To them, it was destiny unfolding in whispers and symbols. The rituals of earlier hours, taggers, herbs, they were scaffolding to hold the fragile bridge between waking and dream, between the world of flesh and the world of spirit. Whether those rituals worked or not, the belief was enough to carry nobles through the darkest hours. You feel the tension yourself now, as if the chamber has pulled you into its spell. Every flicker of shadow, every stir of fabric feels charged with meaning, and you realize that in this world there is no such thing as just sleeping. There is only navigating the perilous landscapes of the night, armed with rituals, both sacred and strange. The bedchamber lies hushed now, curtains heavy, the brazier dimming to a faint glow. For the first time tonight, true silence settles over the room. But it is not a silence of peace, it is a silence filled with tension, as though waiting for something unseen. You feel the weight of the day's rituals pressing down, the dagger beneath the pillow, the herbs under the mattress, the poppy seeds on the tongue, the faint smell of burnt hair and nails still clinging to the air. All of it has built toward this moment sleep itself, the most fragile and dangerous ritual of all. You lie beside the noble in imagination, listening to the rhythm of their breathing. At first it steadies, drifting toward rest. But sleep is not a guarantee. In the medieval mind, dreams were not random sparks of memory. They were messages, warnings, sometimes even intrusions by demons. And so every sound in the chamber feels magnified. The flutter of the caged bird at the foot of the bed, the restless shift of the cat, the soft sigh of a servant half dozing on a pallet nearby. Each detail feels like an omen. The noble stirs. Perhaps it is the poppy seeds working their subtle magic. Their eyelids twitch, lips move faintly as though speaking, and then comes the gasp, the sharp intake of breath that marks the plunge into dream. Was it a good vision or a troubling one? Hard to say, but in these households, dreams mattered. Some were recounted in the morning to confessors or astrologers who parsed every symbol like holy scripture. Was a river in a dream a sign of prosperity or of flooding to come? Historians still argue whether nobles truly believed these interpretations or used them as convenient excuses for decisions already made. And then there was fear, the fear of nightmares. The incubus, a demon said to sit upon the chest of sleepers, was a common terror. To ward it off, nobles whispered prayers, clutched crucifixes, or even muttered charms in the moments before drifting off. Yet sometimes the fear was too great, and even the rituals failed. Chroniclers tell of nobles waking in terror, crying out, servants rushing forward with water, candles relit, curtains thrown open. Nightmares weren't dismissed as just dreams. They were warnings. Battles in miniature, sometimes blamed on curses or witchcraft. One ritual tied to these fears is especially strange. Some nobles, it is said, would whisper their desires directly to the moon before sleeping, hoping the celestial body would intercede in dreams. Tonight, as clouds drift across the high arrow slit, a pale shaft of moonlight falls across the curtain. You imagine the noble parting the drapes, lifting their gaze, and murmuring words too soft for servants to hear. Was it a prayer for children, for victory, for mercy? The moon, silent and cold, offers no answer. Yet the act itself is reassurance that even in sleep, the noble has appealed to powers greater than themselves. The dream resumes. You picture shifting landscapes, a forest filled with voices, a battlefield where faces blur, a banquet where every goblet tastes of ash. These were not idle phantasms. They were treated as messages that could shape tomorrow's choices. If a noble dreamed of victory, they might ride boldly into war. If they dreamed of betrayal, they might imprison a friend by morning. The line between dream and waking reality was frighteningly thin. You lie still, feeling the room pulse with this tension. The cat at the foot of the bed stretches, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The caged bird rustles once, as though disturbed by something unseen. A servant shifts in their sleep, muttering a quick prayer. The noble breathes uneasily, lost in visions only they can see. To us, it seems like a restless night. To them, it was destiny unfolding in whispers and symbols. The rituals of earlier hours, daggers, herbs, seeds, ashes, and moonlight, were not frivolous. They were scaffolding to hold the fragile bridge between waking and dream, between the world of flesh and the world of spirit. Whether those rituals worked or not, the belief was enough to carry nobles through the darkest hours. You feel the tension yourself now, as if the chamber has pulled you into its spell. Every flicker of shadow, every stir of fabric feels charged with meaning, and you realize that in this world there is no such thing as just sleeping. There is only navigating the perilous landscapes of the night, armed with rituals both sacred and strange. Asterisk, asterisk, the faintest sound of a rooster drifts through the slit windows, muffled yet unmistakable. Dawn is near. The castle begins to stir, not with bustling footsteps yet, but with the subtle sense that the night's grip is loosening. The embers in the brazier are gray and fragile, the last curls of incense little more than memory. And in the curtained bed, the noble begins to shift, breathing heavier, eyelids twitching as dream gives way to waking. The transition from night to morning was not simple. Just as falling asleep demanded ritual, so too did rising. Curtains were pulled back with deliberate slowness, letting the first pale light creep into the chamber. Servants entered quietly, carrying fresh cloths, clean water, and sometimes bread dipped in honey for the first bite of the day. Everything that was hidden in shadow is revealed again. The dagger retrieved from under the pillow slipped discreetly back into its sheath. The herbs pulled from beneath the mattress, tossed into the hearth before they could sour. The cage with its animal guardian removed, to be fed or replaced. One by one, the signs of the strange night vanish. The poppy seeds are gone, leaving no trace on lips. The rosewater scent fades beneath the sharper smell of bread and smoke. The ashes in the brazier are swept away, along with the hair and nails that had fed the flames. By daylight, no one speaks of them. These were things of the night, dissolved like dreams at cockcrow. Historians still argue whether such secrecy was intentional, whether nobles knew their rituals skirted the edge of forbidden superstition. Perhaps they did. Perhaps that was why the chamber was always cleaned so meticulously each dawn, so nothing odd lingered to be judged. Yet, for all the cleansing, echoes remain. The servant who overheard whispered bargains behind the curtains remembers them. The animal that curled at the noble's feet carries away whatever burden was placed upon it. The moon, fading now into daylight, has recorded every prayer murmured in its silver presence. You realize that nothing vanishes entirely, not ashes, not whispers, not dreams. They drift into memory, shaping choices and fears long after dawn. And as you step back into the corridor, watching light creep across stone, you understand the noble family has survived another night, not because of strong walls or sharp blades, but because of rituals, layer upon layer, odd and elaborate, sacred and strange. To us, they may seem superstitious, even absurd. To them, they were shields stronger than iron, as necessary as food or water. The rooster crows again, louder this time. Servants bustle in earnest now, preparing clothing, opening shutters, letting the day resume its ceaseless march. But within the noble bedchamber, something quieter lingers, the faint aftertaste of dreams, the memory of whispered vows, and the knowledge that the night has secrets it will never fully yield. Asterisk, asterisk, and now, as dawn breaks gently over the stone towers, let your own mind drift into stillness. Imagine the last candle guttering out, its flame bowing gracefully before surrendering to smoke. The curtains that once cocooned fear and whispers fall silent, soft folds blending back into shadow. Everything that seemed so heavy in the dark daggers, beneath pillows, herbs under mattresses, prayers to the moon melts into harmless traces as morning warms the world. Breathe in slowly, as though you too had rinsed your hands in rosewater, the fragrance still clinging faintly to your fingertips. Exhale softly, letting go of the sharpness of burnt clippings, of anxious dreams, of restless turning beneath heavy blankets. The noble chamber fades from sight, leaving only the steady rhythm of your own breath, as reassuring as the heartbeat of the cat once curled at the foot of the bed. Let your thoughts stretch like dawn across the horizon, long, slow, gentle. The castle becomes distant, a silhouette softened by haze. The moon that received whispered secrets sinks low, replaced by pale daylight that carries no judgment, no fear. You are safe here, wrapped not in curtains but in calm. The night has done its work. The fears and rituals of ages past can remain with their lords and ladies, their servants and their shadows. For you, only rest remains. Allow your eyes to grow heavy, your breath to deepen, your body to ease into the quiet certainty that morning always comes.